Some interesting quarterback talk happening tied to the Washington Commanders, and another former Carolina Panthers player is joining the team. Plus, University of North Carolina offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach Phil Longo is here to talk about Sam Howell. And we take a voicemail as we continue our post-draft series right now on the Locked On Commanders podcast.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome, Commanders fans, to the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, free and available on all platforms. And we thank you for making us your first listen or your first view every single day. I am David Harrison, covering your Commanders for Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation. My co-host Chris Russell not here for today's episode, but you can find the Rooster as one half of the Russell and Medhurst show on the Team 980. Find Chris and Pete there Monday through Friday from 3 to 7 p.m. Eastern, or anytime along with this show on the Audacy app. When we're not there or here, we're on Twitter at DHarrison82, at RussellMania621, and at LO Commanders. Thanks again for making us your first listen or your first view every single day. A former Washington quarterback back in the news, so to speak, Robert Griffin III, reportedly getting interest by a quote-unquote plethora of teams. Plethora by the meaning large or excessive amount of getting so a large or excessive amount of attention from NFL teams reaching out to Robert Griffin III to poke interest into his playing abilities remaining at the age of 32 from NFL teams, again, after running a 4.48 during the Run Rich Run charity event. This according to Robert Griffin III himself. And according to RG3, he's getting interest from the Dallas Cowboys, obviously to be a part of the backup program there for Dak Prescott. The Atlanta Falcons, who now have rookie quarterback Desmond Ridder along with veteran quarterback Marcus Mariota, and the Chicago Bears, who have quarterback Justin Fields, and did basically nothing to help the young former Ohio State quarterback there as he is coming into his second year as quarterback for the Chicago Bears. He says that the interest in the Dallas Cowboys probably wouldn't make the Washington fans very happy to see him go back home to Dallas. And I will say this, and I can't speak for every fan. Obviously, I know a lot of fans. There still may be a very large number of fans who reminisce about the really great rookie season that RG3 put together, and then the track that he was on before injuries and other things kind of derailed that whole thing. I don't know that Washington fans would really have that big of a reaction to RG3 going to Dallas to be the backup behind Dak Prescott. That's just me. Maybe I'm wrong. I know, again, some people obviously would, but I think by and large, the majority of the fan base probably wouldn't really care all that much. Now, of course, the way that these things in the NFL gods tend to work, Dak Prescott goes out for whatever reason, RG3 comes in, and who knows, RG3 runs all over the field against the Washington Commanders and lights them up and wins a game for the Dallas Cowboys. Then in that circumstance, of course, everything would go haywire and all kinds of insanity would ensue after something like that happened. But just strictly going to Dallas to back up Dak Prescott, not sure a whole lot of people going to care. Also, Robert, plethora means, larger excessive amount, 11%. That's 3 teams of the 32 teams in the NFL, 11%, not a plethora. Just saying. So interesting to whatever extent you want it to be interesting. It's out there. He doesn't obviously start at any of those locations. And as far as the Chicago Bears are concerned, not going to do RG3 is not going to do anything with no weapons any more than Justin Fields is going to do with no weapons. So good luck to them and whoever they put at quarterback. If anything, putting RG3 quarterback the Chicago Bears is just to ensure that Justin Fields doesn't suffer the same fate and get banged around and beat up in a young stage in his career like RG3 actually did. So if RG3 wants to go there and be that shelter for Justin Fields' health, then by all means, more power to you. Good luck there in the Windy City. Some teams not playing home games in their home stadiums this year, going overseas, and the Green Bay Packers, New Orleans Saints, Jacksonville Jaguars, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and Arizona Cardinals all hosting games overseas this season as part of the NFL's international series. The full schedule is still to be released later here in the month of May, but on Wednesday, the NFL went ahead and released the teams and the dates and the times of when they'll be playing overseas. The Giants and Packers will be heading to London, as will the Minnesota Vikings and New Orleans Saints, and the Denver Broncos and Jacksonville Jaguars. So all 3 of those matchups, Giants and Packers, Vikings at Saints, and we say at with quotation marks, Denver at Jacksonville, all be taking place in London. One of them will be played in Wembley. The Seattle Seahawks will visit, quote unquote, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Munich, Germany in mid-November for Tampa Bay's home game. That one's a little bit interesting. The first ever NFL regular season game being played in the country of Germany. San Francisco and Arizona will face off in Mexico City. All 4 of the European games, so the 3 London games and the game in Germany, all of those will take place here in the States, 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. So if you're on the West Coast and you want to see one of those teams play, enjoy your 6:30 wake up and morning football dose. Look, hey, there's worse things to wake up 6:30 in the morning for, right? And then the Arizona San Francisco game, I believe that one is a prime time game. So that's some NFL news going on. And then finally, some Washington Commanders specific. Another former Panther joining the Commanders, but this one never played for Ron Rivera, so maybe it's a little bit okay. 6-year veteran wide receiver Alex Erickson joining the Washington Commanders on Wednesday. Spent his first 5 years in the NFL with the Cincinnati Bengals. Obviously, Ron was not there. Spent 2021 with the Carolina Panthers. Ron was here, so obviously Ron did not coach Erickson. 96 catches in his 6 years in the NFL, 1,141 yards. He's a return guy. He's got some receiving skills, some receiving abilities, but basically he's coming here to compete for a return job, kind of like DeAndre Carter. Not necessarily the exact same type of player, but just kind of the exact same type of career scenario where they're going to have to earn a spot. Erickson's got to earn a spot on the special teams, and then from there maybe get some opportunities to show that he can also contribute to the offense. In his 6 years in the NFL, Erickson has amassed over 2,700 yards in kick returns, 24.8 yard career average in kick returns is pretty good. 1,278 punt return yards, 8.1 yards per punt return average for young Mr. Erickson. Coming up, I'm going to be joined by University of North Carolina offensive coordinator and quarterback coach Phil Longo to talk about 2022 NFL draft pick for the Washington Commanders by the Washington Commanders in the 5th round, quarterback Sam Howell. And yes, I asked him how he thinks Howell would fare if he were thrust into the starting position. No, I did not ask him to break down Carson Wentz, but you'll get to hear that for yourself. Coming up here with UNC offensive coordinator, quarterback coach Phil Longo on the Locked On Commanders podcast. But first, we have to talk about our friends over at BlueNile.com, where you can celebrate all of life's special moments, from creating the custom engagement ring of her dreams to gifting a classic and timeless jewelry piece, all at prices you won't find at a traditional jeweler. And with Mother's Day coming up, it's the perfect time to get to know Blue Nile. Whether she prefers a statement piece or everyday subtle elegance, BlueNile.com has fine jewelry options for every mom. Shop high-quality classic diamond earrings, elegant tennis bracelets, or gemstone pendant necklaces. Mark Mother's Day with something enduring. Classic diamond stud earrings, elegant tennis bracelets, birthstone pendants, and so much more on BlueNile.com. And the best part, 100% satisfaction guarantee. Shop stress-free with guaranteed free shipping and returns. This Mother's Day, give mom something she'll treasure forever with fine jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On listeners get $50 off a $500 purchase or more. This podcast exclusive is only good through Mother's Day, so use the code Locked On. That's code Locked On. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. Shop stress-free and find your forever piece. Go to BlueNile.com today. Segment 2 here at the Locked On Commanders podcast on this Thursday. David Harrison going solo at DHarrison82 on Twitter. My co-host Chris Russell not here for the episode, but you can find him at WrestleMania621 in the show at LO Commanders. Like I said at the end of the first segment, University of North Carolina offensive coordinator and quarterback coach Phil Longo sat down with me for about 10 minutes to talk about Washington Commanders' 5th round draft pick in the 2022 NFL draft, quarterback Sam Howell. So here is that conversation. For those of you on YouTube, unfortunately, Coach couldn't do it over video, so we just have audio. I'm going to overlay some pictures and all that stuff with Sam Howell and his time at UNC for you, but you'll still get to hear the interview here with Coach Longo. Locked On Commanders, joined now by University of North Carolina Tar Heels offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach Phil Longo. Coach Longo, we appreciate you taking some time to speak with us, and figure we start with the elephant in the room. What do you make of your guy Sam Howell dropping all the way to the 5th round of the 2022 NFL draft?
You know, it's hard for me to project why, and I don't know the needs of all these teams, and I know that Sam was evaluated very highly. I know that it seemed to be a surprise to some scouts and NFL coaches that I know very well that he was still around in the 5th. But the way I look at it is, all Sam needs is an opportunity, and that's what Washington is providing him with. And I know he's elated to be with the Commanders. And I also know that he wants an opportunity just to go and compete. So I think he's a steal. Obviously, I'm biased. He was my quarterback, but very, very talented, elite arm talent, phenomenal accuracy. I don't know if you're going to find a guy that's going to prepare more or know more about the game than Sam. That was always one of his strengths, one of his many strengths. And so I'm just looking forward to him playing in your uniform now. And now he's got another huge fan.
Absolutely. So you talk about him being one of your best guys. Let's go back to Sam's arrival to North Carolina. Originally committed to Florida State, decommitted to choose your program over the Seminoles, and then came in as a freshman, won the starting job. Was that something that you guys basically expected him to do when he committed to North Carolina, was come in and take claim to that starting job, or was there something you saw that you maybe didn't expect when he first got onto campus?
Well, I had recruited Sam Howell even before I got to North Carolina. I recruited him when I was at Ole Miss, and he was coming out of high school, and I thought he was one of the top 2 or 3 high school quarterbacks coming out at that time. And I did not have the same shot at Sam at Ole Miss that I did when we put the Tarheel colors on. Obviously, that was his home state school. You know, I'm all of a sudden now I'm at the top school in the state of North Carolina, and you know, I think he was looking for the best place for him, and he decided to flip from Florida State to North Carolina. And, you know, we let him come in and compete with 2 other freshman quarterbacks that were on the roster, and Sam won it outright. And, the last 3 years, I think, is history.
Absolutely. Speaking one of those years, 2020, you and Sam, you guys put together quite a show there with the Tar Heels offense. Unfortunately, or fortunately in some ways as well, led to a lot of talent leaving in the 2021 NFL draft. And a lot has really been said and made about a dip in production from Sam as a quarterback in 2021, even with the understanding that a lot of talent around him left. But still, you guys had one of the top offenses in the ACC, 1,000-yard receiver, 2,000-yard rushers. Sam himself put up amazing numbers. Was the dip in production overblown during the lead up to the NFL draft, do you think? And if so, do you think it bled not just in the media, but into what teams ultimately thought of him as an NFL prospect?
You know, it's hard for me to project what others are thinking, but I will say he lost 2,000-yard rushers the year after the 2020 season. He lost 2,000-yard receivers that same year. Going into this past season, I think a lot of people don't realize the only returning starting receiver that we had, we lost complications from surgery in camp. So we had a 5th skill player not return for Sam. And then we also lost our starting center to a surgery issue prior to the beginning of the season for a while. So we really had to lean on Sam a lot and lean on a veteran O-line that didn't kick off the season as well as we had hoped. But what people don't realize is from a total offensive output or offensive yardage standpoint this year, Sam had more offensive yardage this year than he did in either of the 2 seasons before. He just happened to do a little bit more of it on the ground. I think he threw for 300 or 400 yards less, but went from a guy who had 130-something yards rushing the year before to, the mid-800s. And you take the sack yardage away, and he's a 1,000-yard rusher. So overall, from a productivity standpoint, I mean, Sam, yardage-wise, was more productive this year than the two years prior. But he did it with a much less prolific cast around him, and that's obviously that was the difference from one season to the next.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at the stats, you're 100% correct. It's very impressive, especially when you put into context what was happening there with your guys' squad and the talent lost and then lost in season as well, like you just mentioned. And I know Sam said that he wouldn't give up that experience for anything in the world because he thinks it made him stronger as a person and as a player. Of course, one of the players you guys did lose to the draft in 2021 was wide receiver Dyami Brown, who Sam now gets to reunite with in Washington. Coach, when we spoke to him after he was picked, he said Dyami was one of his best friends. Can you kind of describe their chemistry going back to UNC and what the duo could be capable of if they get a chance to get on the NFL field together?
Well, I think Sam Howell and Dyami Brown their preparation for the 2019 season. We came out of the spring in 2019 with a lot of question marks regarding who's going to be the starting quarterback, who are our starting receivers. We didn't have really any established players at either one of those positions. And Dyami and Sam led a group of guys that got a tremendous amount of work and progress done and taken care of over the course of the summer. And that group, when they came back heading into the 19th season, it was like night and day. And I credit a lot of that, going back 3 years from now, I credit a lot of that to De'Ami Brown and Sam Howell kind of taking the reins and getting those guys going. And that led to our progress and a really, really good 2020 season that ended up in the Orange Bowl against A&M. And I have no doubt that if they have an opportunity to connect here on the pro field the way they did in the college field, that timing and that feel that they have for each other will return. And I'm excited to see the two of them take the field at the same time if and when that happens.
Absolutely, Coach. I know we're already excited to see the two in training camps and camps leading up to. We got the rookie camp this week. I bet you De'Ami probably wishes he could be out there if he could. But even as a 5th-round pick, even with the slide and everything going on, Sam Howell, as soon as he becomes a Commander and as soon as the Commanders make him a part of their squad, the speculation immediately started brewing about how long it was going to take before he supplanted Carson Wentz as a starting quarterback. Now, I'm not going to ask you to comment on what's happening inside the Commanders quarterback room, but I think most of us are expecting, outside of injury or Carson just being a terrible fit ultimately with the team to start the season, that he's going to be QB1 in 2022, and Ron Rivera is certainly standing on that platform as of right now. But if the opportunity arises, if the stars align and shifts to where Sam Howell is thrust into the starting NFL position there in his first season with Washington, how do you think he'll fare? And more importantly, I suppose from an introduction standpoint, what do you think Washington really needs to do to put around him to support him the right way in that effort?
So I think one of the things that makes Sam so good is his understanding of what he needs to do from an next point, and also his understanding of what he has around him. And so, from now through, let's say he plays 10 years in the league, he's going to have a different set of weapons every year. And he's got to find a way to execute and take advantage of the weapons that you have from season to season. That's something that he did here at North Carolina. It's something they'll have to do at Washington. And, it's the recruiting deal in college is all about stars, right? Like, they're giving these stars out to these kids. And they rank them that way. And in the pros, for me, I always see it as they're projecting what round guys are going in. As soon as we get a high school kid in college, those stars don't mean anything. And I would imagine that as soon as you get a guy in the NFL from college, the round that they were chosen doesn't mean anything. All that matters is how productive they are and how they execute. And at the end of the day, Sam is very, very prolific with the way he plays the quarterback. He's extremely talented, great arm talent, great accuracy, impeccable preparation. I liken him more to Drew Brees than anybody I've ever studied in the NFL. And so if that plays out at all, I think the Commanders and Sam are going to be a good fit for each other.
Yeah, absolutely, Coach. I know a lot of Commanders fans are excited to see him as part of the roster, and a lot of people here in the media, we're looking forward to kind of seeing what he can do on the field and watch this journey as he goes through it. Coach Longo, we appreciate your time, of course. I know you're a busy man. NFL teams like to go back to sources of talent, though, and this is 2 years in a row now they've come to you and your offense for NFL caliber talent. Who should we be looking out for in the 2023 NFL draft coming out of the Tar Heels program?
Oh, there's a bunch of them, I'd say, starting with wide receiver Josh Downs. And, I can tell you easily, you have a huge Washington Commanders fan at North Carolina now.
Absolutely. All right, Coach, I wish you safe travels, a successful 2022 campaign in the ACC, and thank you for joining us here on the Locked On Commanders podcast. Appreciate the invite. Have a great one. You too, Coach. All right, once again, that was University of North Carolina offensive coordinator and quarterback coach Phil Longo. Greatly appreciate him for taking some time out with us, and appreciate the university for setting that up. Phil is not the last person we're going to hear from on today's episode of Locked On Commanders. We're going to hear from one of you, a fan of the Washington Commanders, in the very next segment. One more segment on today's episode, brought to you today by betonline.net, your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. Final segment of the Locked On Commanders podcast here on this Thursday episode for you. David Harrison going solo at DHarrison82 on Twitter. My partner and co-host Chris Russell not here, but you can find him on Twitter at RussellMania621, and the show at LO Commanders. Like I said, we had a voicemail from one of the Washington Commanders fan, a listener or viewer of the show. So let's hear from them right now.
Hey guys, it's Joel from North Carolina. Looking over the draft, there's so many people that are upset by who they picked at 16. And I understand many people want to look and make the sexy pick, especially in your top 20 or one that's going to make the big splash. But I think they made the right move. It's giving them a compliment to Terry McLaurin. And what do? When you trade back, you pick up that third that you didn't have, and you draft a kid out of Alabama, the running back, and you give someone to play right behind Gibby. So I think you're going to see a lot of 1-2 punch with him. I mean, we saw something with the offense was very lacking last year. I think this adds right back to it. And honestly, the kid from North Carolina, you look at his plays, his abilities, I think he's going to push for playing time, but also I think it's going to give the opportunity for Scott Turner to even use Gibson as a wide receiver some. So it's going to add a whole new wrinkle to this offense. Appreciate everything y'all do. Have a good day. Bye.
All right. We appreciate the phone call. And yeah, look, it's a very level-headed and kind of in perspective way of really looking at this draft class that the Washington Commanders came away from out of the 2022 NFL draft. And you go back to yesterday's episode and Chris kind of broke down the selection of Brian Robinson Jr., the running back out of Alabama. And a lot of people kind of had a day 3 grade on him. And some people went out there and said that the Commanders basically didn't know what they were doing and are laughing, like all this kind of craziness. And listen, I know we all want to believe that our opinion is correct. But Martin Mayhew talked about it over the weekend that the people inside the building, they know how they evaluate their team. They know how they see their team. Now, granted, the way that we see the team, or that you or I or Mel Kiper Jr. or Daniel Jeremiah or whoever might see their team could be totally different. And time is going to tell who is really correct and who is really wrong. But there are so many different factors into what makes an NFL team successful that even if who they pick don't necessarily pan out and work out, you can't just simply go back to it and say, see, we told you Brian Robinson Jr. was the day 3. There's just too many other factors that determine success and failure in the National Football League to make it that simplistic. To make it that simplistic would to really be kind of to take away from what the process is. And look, I talked to Herm Edwards, head coach of the Arizona State Sun Devils football program. The Buccaneers drafted running back Rachaad White out of there, so I talked to him for that show. But I asked him about a question that kind of applies here. I said, about the media disparity and what actually the NFL did as far as valuing players and ranking and projecting. And he said, I'm always going to lean on the guys inside. And Herm is someone who's been in the NFL room. He's been in the analyst seat with ESPN. Now he's coaching the college game. He said that the guys inside the organizations, they know what they're looking for. They know what they want. They're going to judge whether their draft was successful. And when you look at who they came away with, Jahan Dotson is going to take some attention away from Terry McLaurin. Obviously, he's more healthy, from last time we saw them than Curtis Samuel. Now, again, things can happen. So there's no guarantees that that's going to remain until the NFL season and through the NFL season. But those are things you can't necessarily predict. And if they get Curtis Samuel back on the field, Logan Thomas back on the field, this offense now has a lot of weapons. Talk about the word plethora. They have a plethora of weapons for Carson Wentz to go through. And if Carson Wentz can't maximize those weapons, then the team knows what they need to do moving forward, and they have a better nucleus to put a quarterback moving forward. And then you look at the defense again. You lose Matt Ioannidis, you lose Tim Settle. Granted, Ioannidis was kind of on your own. I understand that. But either way, you lose 2 key defensive linemen, so you go and you draft another one to try to plug that hole. You see the issue at the running game with Antonio Gibson being ridden so hard, J.D. McKissick filling his role, both of them coming away with a lot of injuries last year and some fumble injuries due to the workload maybe with Antonio Gibson. So Brian Robinson Jr. fits that. So, I mean, every pick basically in this class, you can essentially kind of identify and say, here's why Washington went the direction they did, even if they weren't necessarily the player we thought that they might go with, or in the round that we thought they might go with it. You can see when they're addressing needs, where they're addressing needs, and that ultimately is going to help determine whether or not they're successful. Now, you're going to have your opinions. We're going to have our opinions. We've been dropping grades on these draft picks all week long. We're going to continue tomorrow when Chris and I get back together for our final episode. We'll break down the rest of the class, talk a little bit more about Sam Howell and Carson Wentz and that whole dynamic, and then we'll give our final grades for the 2022 NFL Draft class for your Washington Commanders. Until then, we thank you again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or your first view of the day. Now make your second view or listen to the Locked On NFL podcast. The schedule may be dark, but the NFL never stops, and neither does Locked On NFL. Get insights and opinions from hosts including Ross Jackson, Chris Carter, and Tony Wiggins, plus local Locked On NFL hosts repping all 32 squads. I was a fill-in on Wednesday's episode. If you want to go back and check out the Wednesday episode, Ross Jackson and I cutting it up over there on the Locked On NFL channel. There's no off season for real fans, so make sure you subscribe to Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. We will be back. In the meantime, if you've got questions or topics you want to discuss, you want to grade these rookies yourself and let us know what you think about the draft class, send them in to lockedonwashingtoncommanders@gmail.com or call in and be a part of the show by dialing 301-615-3577. For Chris Russell of the Russell and Medhurst Show on the Team 980, I'm David Harrison, writer for SI.com's Fan Nation. If you're out and about, please be safe, be kind to one another, and thank you for joining us right here on the Locked On Commanders podcast.